in a way that perhaps puts them back into the hands of the judge that sentenced them, or involves your department in some way?
Yes, it does, but
you're not recommending that.
No, I would highly recommend it. But the reality is that in San Francisco, I think the caseload for a probation officer is 500 cases. I'm not sure what it is for parole, what the caseload is for a parole officer. So apart from an arrest, or apart from going to provide a dirty P test, a typical probation officer or parole officer isn't monitoring whether they're going to work or not, isn't monitoring whether they're going to AA or not. They don't have time to do that. That is one of the things that the post-release program that we run does for people. We give them the support that they need to continue to do that.
Commissioner Shapiro?
I can say that when I was a prosecutor, my biggest fear was that I would give somebody a break and then they would go out and it's the Willie Horton problem, for lack of a better term. And that, to me, seems to be the biggest philosophical obstacle to this whole effort. And I'm curious how you respond to that threat, or, God forbid, the reality that even though you're doing such fine work in reducing the recidivism rate, it's that one case that will color the public's perception that somehow you're being soft on crime.
Well, you have two choices. You can participate with the knowledge that you are not going to be 100% successful, or you can stand back and let somebody else be responsible. And I choose to step forward and say, we're going to establish programs that we can show work, even if they don't work 100% of the time. I don't know of any program dealing with ex-offenders that works 100% of the time. And so if you're going to run an ex-offender program, you're going to take a risk.
And that's how you get elected 8 times in San Francisco. But I guess for the state, the issue is what sort of leadership or what sort of things can be done to sort of broaden that courageous stand. Because it seems to me all the literature I've read begins with the two concepts that public safety is our chief concern. And every time these issues come up, everyone says that. Public safety is our chief concern, as if the reforms you're talking about are opposed to public safety, or as if you have to overcome that. And I'm wondering if you had any thoughts as to how we might be able to send that message, if that's a message we want to send.
Yes, I do, and I think it requires a small amount of study, because I think you can get the support of the public if you show that when we do nothing, or when we do as little as we're doing now, the recidivism rate is 75 or 80%. When we put a person in this program or that program, it drops by half. It's not going to drop by 100%, but it's going to drop by half. And then people are going to say, well, then I think that's a program worth supporting. One of the problems that you have with programs such as this nature is you almost only see the failures. I talk with my deputies in the jail, and they'll say, oh, Sheriff, we don't think these programs work. We keep seeing the same people back time and time again. And I'll say, well, you do see the same people back time and time again, but you don't see the ones that don't come back. And you have to be able to complete that messaging that there are going to be, you're going to let them out anyway. You're going to let them out anyway. And so you're going to wipe your hands of it and say, we'll just go with God. We hope things will go well for you. Or you're going to say, we know you're not going to succeed. We know thousands of you aren't going to succeed. We can reduce that to hundreds of you who aren't going to succeed. And that's a good program.
Sheriff, you mentioned you have a jail with 360 beds that's empty.
Yes.
Are all your other jails full?
About 80%, 85% full.
So how much vacant capacity do you think you have totally in the system?
Today, about 450 beds.
Okay. Do you run the juvenile system as well?
No.
Okay.
No kids.
Okay. No kids. Although you are one of the cities that I don't think sends any kids to DJJ.
I don't think so either. And I know that there was a discussion about juveniles being prosecuted as adults. That doesn't happen too often. It happens occasionally in a homicide case, but I haven't seen it too often in San Francisco.
Where does probation fit in this? I always have to ask, because San Francisco is different than every other place in the state. But yeah. Where does probation fit in the hierarchy of the who runs what in San Francisco?
It kind of ebbs and flows with whoever is the chief adult probation officer. We have a chief adult probation officer, and we have a chief juvenile probation officer.
Okay.
Our current chief adult probation officer is a very ambitious and aggressive person. Wendy's still formerly with CDCR, and
she testified in front of us in November.
well, she is determined to partner with everybody. And so, for example, she found out that we had a high school program, and she said, okay, if I clean out a conference room, will you put a high school class in my conference room in my probation office? We said yes. So she is building on programs that are there, and I think she's struggling with, as we all are, with resources compared to the number of cases she's given.
So she works directly for the board or for the mayor, or
She's appointed by the Superior Court and works directly for the Superior Court.
she works for the court?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. And I mean, I know that you're not the probation person, but generally the realignment types of things that are being discussed here in Sacramento and devolving a number of the responsibilities down to the local levels. What's your view of that concept, and how prepared is San Francisco to deal with those types of issues, and what kind of things do you need from the state, obviously other than funding? So.
Well, of course, some clarity would be nice, but it's very muddy at this point as to what realignment actually is or will become. As I said, our county is fortunate in the sense that we at least have some jail space, and if they start having state prisoners serve their sentences in the local jail, we can handle that up to a point. I know they're talking about reverting parolees to the probation department, and that would require significant resource additions to the probation department because they can't really handle hardly what they have right now. And I think the unknowns are kind of where the line is going to be, where the two lines are going to be drawn. What type of prisoner is going to stay in the county as opposed to the state, and how long they're going to be there. County jails in general are really not set up to house people for 15 years. Prisoners get more sophisticated than your staff, and that ties up a bed for an awful long time. So I'm hoping there's going to be some length of time cutoff. Now, I do think that many of the state prisoners, particularly ones they're getting out anyway in 12 months or 2 years, they could certainly do their time in the county and make better connections in the county. But I do think there have to be resources that come with it. The resources that I've heard is that they're going to send something like $25,000 per prisoner per year. And my current daily jail rate, as given to me by the state of California when I hold parolees, is $77, and my actual cost is about $120 per inmate per year. That's labor costs primarily, labor and food and clothing.
So about $40,000 a year to house somebody in your jail for a year?
Yes, that's correct.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah,
Because I think the number up here is about, moves around, but somewhere between 55,000 or something
Yeah,
like that.
we're in that 40 or 45, yeah.
Okay.
And if I can make one last presentation,
absolutely.
unless there are more questions. One of the other questions asked of me was about a reentry council. San Francisco's legislature, County Board of Supervisors, has created a reentry council which has representatives of the various criminal justice agencies and state parole and federal parole and a number of ex-offenders. The idea is to try to establish policies and that kind of thing. And it's kind of slow getting started, in my opinion, but it brings people together that oftentimes aren't in the same room, and that's a good thing. And then they also have developed a resource guide for ex-offenders, which is a 200-page resource guide, which is available for ex-offenders, and it's really quite good. This is its second edition. It's got a lot of resources about how to get a job, where you can go to live, who's going to be somewhat receptive to your prior past, how to handle your prior past, and things like that. And so it's a kind of resource that if someone can read and will take the time to read, there's a lot of good information in there.
This question goes to the issue of accountability in the system and how you evaluate what you do. But do you ever try a program and look at it a year later and say, "Oh, that didn't work," and just blow it up?
Yes, we have. We've had art programs, for example, that were more disruptive than beneficial. we had an outdoor gardening program, which was more labor intensive than it was beneficial, and we've converted that into a gardening program for at-risk youth who aren't in custody. And so we still use the greenhouse and the organic farm that we've created, but we don't use it for prisoners anymore. So yeah, there are programs there are programs that you lose funding on and they drift away.
Right. But the ones you do run, I mean, you put them through a rigorous evaluation process to make sure that what you thought was going to happen is actually happening.
We have evaluated them all within the last 4 years. Unfortunately, evaluations are expensive, and you generally don't have much money to hire a professional evaluator. To say nothing of which, even defining recidivism is open to debate. I generally use what I consider the toughest standard, which is, was the person rearrested? Other people will use the standard of, were they
Reincarcerated?
convicted, or were they was a parole revoked or a conviction, that type of thing. I think that sort of a baseline is were they rearrested. So we have evaluated all the programs within the last 5 years.
Okay. Yeah, Senator Rubio.
In your governance structure, because it's city county, it's somewhat different. Where does the cost for delivering medical care for people who re-enter the system, whose budget does it fall under?
Essentially the health department's budget, the county department of public health. Sometimes they put it in my budget and I work order it to them. Right. Sometimes it's in their budget, but the employees and the hierarchy is the San Francisco Department of Public Health. There has been a debate for the past 5 budget years in a row as to whether to contract it out, and that has never received the support it needs to contract out. So currently it's essentially San Francisco Department of Public Health employees.
Have you seen the costs increase over the last 5 years?
I would say probably the cost has decreased.
Oh, really?
Partly because we closed a jail, and partly because there's just been budget crunches. We do have a contracted jail psychiatric services program, and they're contracted through the Department of Public Health. They are not city employees; they're contracted employees, and they've cut back also, but primarily they've reduced services. They cut back because of budgetary issues, not because of a desire or lack of need.
Got it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you for coming up, and hopefully the drive back is not as rough as the drive up.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have our final witness. Stuart, if you could introduce
Perspective
her,
from
please.
probation, the overview of proposed changes and best practices. We have Linda Penner, who is Chief Probation Officer of Fresno County. Previously, Chief Penner was director of both the juvenile and adult divisions of the probation department. As chief, she spearheaded the Juvenile Justice Campus, which opened in 2006. Chief Penner is the president of the Chief Probation Officers of California. In 2007, she was appointed to the state's Corrections Standards Authority and the State Advisory Group on Juvenile Delinquency. Good morning, Chief.
Good morning.
Welcome, Ms. Penner. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
And please proceed.
Using a baseball analogy, I think probation has effectively been scheduled as the cleanup batter. And that's appropriate, because I think when you look at our systems, you recognize that, we sort of fall at the end of the spectrum. I think our role has become more and more important as budgets. I think it's always been very important, but people are starting to recognize the abilities, the skills, and the many areas of expertise probation has. And today I'd like to kind of quickly give you a really quick overview about probation, and then move right into 6, 7, 8, and then go into realignment, because I think those are subjects that I've heard you talking about today. And beginning with probation, I can tell you that today in the state of California, there's over 320,000 individuals supervised on felony probation. We do about 220,000 reports to the courts on any given year across the state. There are 58 counties, 59 chiefs. And you just heard from San Francisco why we got that extra one hanging on. they happen to be the only county in the state that has a juvenile chief probation officer and adult chief probation officers. There are many iterations of how the chief probation officer is selected throughout the state. Many are a bifurcated system where the Superior Court may have the overriding vote on who is selected, but the Board of Supervisors participates. There are some jurisdictions that their chief is selected solely by the Board of Supervisors. I happen to be an individual who's selected by the Superior Court. The Board of Supervisors participated in that. It is an interesting dynamic in that you're accountable to the judges, and but you get your money from the Superior Court. I happen to believe, and I'll just give you my own personal opinion, and I think that of many of the chiefs, that is the best system. We are, by code, designed to serve the courts, and that's what we do. I think we've done that by serving the county, and I think if we're doing a good job at what we do, that's how we get it done. A few of my biases I think you need to know about me personally is that I've been in the system for 33 years. I began in victim witness. We run a victim witness program out of our probation department. My early years, the first 9 years of my career, were working with victims of sexual assault and little children who were entering into the court system as witnesses. And then it moved into families of victims of homicide, and then I moved up through the system, was fortunate enough to become the chief. I happened to be married to a Superior Court judge who has only been a Superior Court judge for 3 years, and I tell you that not to fashion any of your opinions about me, but to tell you that I was the chief long before he was a judge, and he was then a lifetime prosecutor prior to that. I had some experiences with the District Attorney Dumanis. She and I both, in the early infancy of National Institute of Drug Court, were participants in that initiative. I'm a believer in specialty courts or boutique courts, whatever you choose to call them, but I am a pragmatist in that that is a very difficult system to maintain when systems are facing the kind of economic downturns that we are. With all of that said, I represent then two factions here today. One is I want you to know that the chief probation officers of California are engaged and entrenched and have a long history of doing just what the state's about ready to ask them to do. And as the chief in Fresno County, we run a number of specialty programs, most of the ones that you're talking about here today, including veterans courts and drug courts of all different kinds. We hope to run a specialty violation of probation court, but that's not the way it's done in my county. We have behavioral health courts, both in the adult system and the juvenile system. Those are all very expensive endeavors, ones that I think have very productive outcomes, but not generally the kinds of outcomes that garner us a great deal of financial support on the other end of the equation. With that said, I was pleased that in 2009, Governor Schwarzenegger signed 678. It was an effort of Senator Leno and Senator Benoit. It was something that was positive on both sides of the aisle. It was a nonpartisan effort that went forth, and I think in its infancy, after it was funded by ARA money, to give us startup money, $45 million was given to the probation departments across the state to begin this effort. And to the credit of the chiefs, they did so by rolling out evidence-based programs and assessments and a number of other kinds of treatment iterations, and did not buy staff with that one-time money. And what we've seen, and maybe some of that is a result of just a change in a look at a population, but in the first year of its operation, 4,000 less offenders have found their way into CDCR. We find great pleasure in that. We thought we could always do that, and some of that may simply be a Hawthorne effect, build it and it will come. But I really think that we have a number of things going into place as we speak that will impact the system a long way down the road. Realignment. Early in January, the Chief Probation Officers, the District Attorneys Association, the Sheriff's Association, and the police chiefs were invited into the governor's office to discuss his budget plan. As you guys obviously are well aware of, that has been unrolling since that time, like it or don't. I personally have been involved from its infancy, and I can tell you that I'm pleased that we have a plan. Anything absent this occurring is incredibly frightening to me. For probation departments across the state, contained in his initiative is the vehicle licensing fee money. And I think you heard earlier from District Attorney Dumanis about the kinds of probation funds that are associated with that VLF money. In my department alone, and we're considered one of the 5 largest departments in the state, it's $6.1 million. And would decimate the juvenile justice side of the house. And when I talk about juvenile justice, I think it's important to recognize that we've done a lot of front-end work on realignment in juvenile justice as we speak. And so when we start to endeavor on the adult side of the house, it is not as daunting to us as it may seem. Now, I will tell you, I did not stand up and volunteer that parole send a large piece of their population to us. But I do recognize that, crisis is the mother of invention. I don't know how else to say it. But we stand to be in a position wherein we have some things that we are going to have to do by virtue of necessity.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
But that's what it was. God, that's not right that I didn't get that.
Yeah,
I'm
I think
testifying.
Commissioner Kay had a question he wanted to interrupt.
I wonder if I could interrupt because before you get too far afield, because you said something that just struck me, and I want to know the context. You said that you made a reference to something decimating the juvenile justice side of the house, and I wasn't sure it was in the context of the realignment proposal, but I'm sure that's not what you meant.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to, if you could walk that back a little.
Well, let me say this: it is what I meant, but I wasn't very clear. So let me take another stab at it. This year, on the 30th of June, the VLF funding stands to sunset, as does the 1% sales tax. And of course, that's all part and parcel of the budget. If this VLF money is gone, juvenile probation departments will be decimated. The $6.1 million, the JJCPA money, any of the ranch camp money that we utilize to run our facilities will go away. And so when I reference that, I'm talking about that loss of revenue.
Is that a subvention that's coming to you, or is this a direct?
It's a direct.
This is the portion of the direct part of the VLF
It's
that's coming.
0.15%
Okay,
VLF money that is directed to law enforcement. Let me say this: in Fresno County alone, we stand to lose 200 sworn officers. Primarily in the probation departments, but police departments, sheriff departments, and district attorneys will all lose funding as a result of the VLF going away.
But this is the governor's proposal is for 5 years.
Well, yes. There's a constitutional amendment that we feel very strongly about that would have to be passed. But we wouldn't. I don't think any of the people who have participated in this effort and have supported it, and I think all 3 of the major groups have come along in support of the governor's proposal, have done so without wanting assurances that there would be a constitutional amendment that would solidify this funding.
Okay, so you see, so your the context of your testimony is that this would be a permanent shift in programs and resources together. But
Right.
in addition, what I'm hearing is that it would also permanently support that which you are currently getting, notwithstanding the new shift of programs and realignment, that it would permanently support what you are currently getting to support your juvenile justice. Okay, thank you.
So moving on down the road, realignment is 3/4 of the way through on the juvenile justice side. As you know, with SB 81, 3 years ago, we were asked to not send any non-707B offenders. And I think that when that occurred, there was a great deal of consternation surrounding that. I think chiefs all over the state were saying, oh my goodness, those kids are very difficult. That's a really troublesome population. We wouldn't have sent them if in fact, we could have dealt with them locally. They've exhausted all local remedies. I think what what we know, since that has rolled out, is that we have adopted and adapted well. We have utilized the funding effectively that we were given as a result of SB 81, and we've moved on down the road, and I think continued a long history of successful work in the juvenile arena when it is appropriately funded and impacted state issues as they arise. And we've also, I think, can take a great deal of the credit for the reduction in juvenile crime rates. I think when we were given the JJCPA money, Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act money, 11 years ago, we were allowed block-granted money where we were allowed to create effective, meaningful programs in our local jurisdictions that worked in our local jurisdictions. They didn't make me do the same program Los Angeles County did. They didn't ask me to operate like San Francisco County may do. And because of that, we saw a reduction in juvenile crime rates. And the chiefs would take credit for that. And I know people might have different opinions, but we take credit for that. We believe that that sort of funding, meaningful funding, given to the locals have had phenomenal impacts. As of January 16th of this year, we took back juvenile parole, DJJ parole. That is rolling out as we speak. It is moving along. We've had some real logistical issues that we've addressed. We've partnered very well with DJJ on the state level to move that population back and effectively manage them. I don't foresee...
What funded that piece?
The state did it... it was DJJ money, I'm assuming, that they sidelined for us. We get $30,000 or $15,000 a year for 2 years for that offender. There is a $110,000 pot available per offender should they meet specific requirements and need specific placement as a result of that. But generally speaking, you'll be given $30,000 for offenders supervised under our jurisdiction. They come back to the county. They leave state jurisdiction. They are no longer a parolee, and we don't call them parolees. We call them reentry probationers in many cases, and they move right into our probation system and are supervised depending on assessments. And I think another very, very important thing to talk about when we start looking at system reforms and system changes, you have to talk about assessment. There is never going to be enough money on the adult or the juvenile side of the house to do what you want to do. You're going to have to rely on some scientific tools and have some outcome measures that are positive if we are going to do a decent job of this at all. And let me say this, even with juvenile realignment and adult realignment, it is not going to be without problems. It is not going to be without the case that none of us like. But that should not stop us from doing what I think is appropriate to do, and that is to move some of these resources back to the locals and let us do what we have proven we can do on the juvenile side with the adult side of the world. Realignment is a daunting and aggressive effort by the state right now. I don't think anybody would say anything different. It is probably something that should have been done in a 2 or 3 year effort, and because of the situation we find ourselves in, it has to be done post haste. And I think it will not be fraught with its own problems. And if you look at realignment right now as though something we're doing from a 900,000-foot level and building the framework from, and then if the 4 votes are found and it gets on the ballot and it passes, in between now getting it on the ballot and then rolling it out prospectively in all of the counties, we're going to have a lot of work to do with the minutia of this enormous project. So frameworks are built, and I'll talk about the 3 areas where the frameworks are built, and it sounds like you're very familiar with that anyway. And the first is the recommended DJJ closure, and I'll tell you that the chiefs as a body oppose that. And so we have reasons for that, and I suspect you're going to want to hear those. So what I will tell you is that right now there will be some unintended consequences with the closure of DJJ, and that is more adult filings and some other very sort of invisible sort of outcomes that I don't think are best for us. The other piece of that is that we all run juvenile, and we call ours the Juvenile Justice Campus out in my county. We run programs that are short-term in nature and very purposeful for a population that the day we start to figure out how to release them with better cognitive skills and abilities to be pro-social when they get out. If we have some individuals that are staying, 120 to 280 days with us, and then we add in a population that may be there for 5 years, it's a much different group of individuals to program. Right now in Fresno County, talking about direct files and Hoover housing, when I checked last week, because I did a presentation for our judges last week, there were 26 people either unfit or direct filed on in our juvenile hall for murder. These are not lightweight individuals. And so when you talk about mixing some very heavyweight sex offenders, some very sophisticated criminals with a population, you do more damage than good, in my humble opinion, and I am sure somebody here takes issue with that. I respect that totally. With that said, the state's going to give us the ability, if we choose, to contract back with them, so year over year. So I may not choose to do that year one. I may decide year two that I can build some capacity for a long-term population and be able to negotiate with the state to keep my offenders in my county in that year. So that would summarize sort of the DJJ shift that we're talking about. That would really complete 100% the DJJ back to the locals. The second piece of that is the parole shift, and that is one that would move the nonviolent, non-serious, non-sex offenders, depending on where they were assessed, back to the locals. I'd like to be able to quote you a hard and fast number on that. It has been a bit of a moving target, so when the state and the locals sort of negotiate those sorts of things, I think we're landing somewhere around 29,000 parolees prospectively coming back on the rolls of local probation departments. That cannot be done without adequate funding. There are arguments to be made that is absolutely a good way to do business, in that the judges, the local jurisdiction, the local programming, the local accountability may fare well for those low to mid-level offenders. And the third piece of it is what I call the non-non-nons, meaning that the non-serious, non-violent, non-sex offenders that have a 3-year term or under would stay in local jails and do their time locally rather than going to the Department of Corrections. That is not, of course, without an option to contract back to the Department of Corrections for bed space. And there are a number of nuances of this.
Do you have capacity in your jail?
No.
You're full.
We are, let me say this, we have bed space, we don't have staffing associated with it, because the counties have been in a great deal of trouble for a long time. So we are at half capacity based on staffing issues. I run the juvenile justice.
So you have half of the beds are vacant? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Not through.
So you do have capacity if you have funding.
I have capacity. I don't have staffing.
But if you get the realignment money,
we will have to look hard at how to build that capacity back up, but not just to incarcerate. Let me say this: there will never be the kind of capacity for the kind of obligation we're going to undertake. In my opinion, you have to begin to look at practices that are different from how we're doing business now. It cannot be lock them up and call it a day, because we'll be full and impacted quickly. And we'll continue then to send them right back to CDCR, because we will not have had any programs in place doing anything differently, and so we won't meet the needs of each.
Okay. Let's stipulate that, but I'm not hearing. Maybe your third. Maybe I've heard the 3 parts. I'm not hearing that this is going to solve anything. Then,
This is just shuffling the deck chairs around. Is realignment a solution then, or is it just taking the same problem and moving it around?
If we do not put in place pieces of this legislation that have accountability associated, that require evidence-based practices, that allow us to do things on the continuum that are different than what we do right now, we are moving the deck chairs. I'm with you.
So is that part of it?
Sorry?
So is that part of all this?
It is. It's written in there that we create a body that looks at the funding and how it's going to be rolled out. Already, I've had conversations with my sheriff on how, she very much would need the bed space associated with the realigned population, that she'll need programs in her jail that are going to operate differently, that I might operate in her jail. It may be that I run a pretrial program with some of this money, or a supervised release program with some of this money, or electronic monitoring with some of this money, or I'm given the alternative to use flash incarceration on violations rather than long-term incarceration as a result of that. So it is a very complex equation. But even if we had all the money we wanted, would we have all the best bed space that we need? I'm not sure that
Commissioner
that's the way
Shapiro
to
had a
approach
question.
What is your current caseload?
for probation.
Yes.
We bank huge bank caseloads. They're upwards of some of them are 1,600 that are banked. We run about 10,000 felons in Fresno County. We try to reduce the actual intensive supervision caseloads. We, with the ARA money, we're able to buy an adult assessment tool, and we're rolling that out as we speak to begin to say low-risk offenders need to be banked. Science tells you, and it's proven practice, that if we bank them, don't do anything with them, we're doing better than we would if we started to try a number of interventions with them. We need to be realigned on the adult side, and because of the lack of resources that have gone to the adult side year over year over year, and the horrible problems that are associated with not funding a local adult programs, we haven't been smart. I think when I was a young probation officer and they had what they call subsidy units that were actually back then a dirty word, that they would give you money for doing well with offenders locally and not sending them, those were politically sort of firecrackers that nobody liked. So they did away with them. And we were much more entrenched in sort of motivating individuals than through evolution, through bigger caseloads, through more serious offenders. We began to evolve into armed departments that had very few resources. I think when you look at that sort of churning population they talk about in CDCR, a number of those churners are individuals that have just worn the courts out. And when you talk about boutique programs, that's one thing. But if you talk about in Fresno County, for instance, they have what they call home courts, where they do felony sentencing every day, part of the day. So there's 6 judges that do that. And what we found with 6, 7, 8 wasn't that those judges did not want to do anything different. They just wanted to send people to prison. We didn't have anything meaningful and effective to offer them. I couldn't go to them and say, hey, I'm going to start a day reporting center, or we are running Thinking for a Change on the adult side, a cognitive behavioral program for these young adults between the age of 18 and 24. And we'd really like you to sort of be open to us doing that. And when we gave those judges, who are not doing anything different than sentencing, so to speak, when we gave them meaningful alternatives, they took them. And they were part of the reason for our success in Fresno County on 6, 7, 8. Because we didn't have alternatives before, they were burnt out, they were tired, he's violated a number of times, you're not getting it, and we don't have anything here for you, so off you go.
And is it fair to say that the treatment part of what you have is limited as well? I mean, do you have... Maybe you could speak to that. What are the resources for getting people into treatment?
Treatment is absolutely going to be an issue. We're short on inpatient drug treatment beds. We have issues in terms of capacity in Fresno, in the community itself. Some of that is the economic woes of a county with the kind of unemployment that we have and the number of other, we're a heavily ag community. And so there's some real issues with capacity in that community. We're going to have to build those. We're going to have to make a difference in some of that. I run 40 beds of inpatient drug treatment out at our JJC for incarcerated kids. For every one kid that gets into one of those beds, we probably turn away 7. We don't keep a waiting list because we just have to take you when your time comes up. So we know, and all the speakers before have said that, and I will affirm that substance abuse is an enormous issue. When I present to high school kids in a big auditorium, I say, okay, how many of you think that when you're booked into the juvenile justice campus you're under the influence of drugs? And they'll think it's like 50-50. And I will ask 2% of that audience to stand up and tell them, nope, these are the only ones who we didn't know were under the influence of alcohol and drugs. And actually what I say to them is, and I think you're lying, because we know that is an enormous issue. Treatment capacity is fast and furious a big problem.
I hate to keep hitting this as a health issue, but in light of that, isn't that fundamentally the biggest problem you have in your work with probation is people who have untreated substance abuse problems?
I would not say that fundamentally. No. I think that is a very significant problem. Let me talk about jobs. Let's say I could get these individuals jobs. If I haven't done anything to change the way that they think, I could get them a job all day long. My problem then is getting them to the job, to getting them some sort of cognitive shift that moves them towards knowing, oh, I have to have this job. I got to go. I got to get up at 8 o'clock every morning. I got to show up. There's some very antisocial, criminogenic thinking that we need to take some time to impact. When we run thinking for a change on the juvenile side, the example I like to use is about kids that steal cars. And by the way, we don't incarcerate very many kids that steal cars in Fresno County because we don't have that kind of room. But kids that steal cars, when you ask a kid, why'd you steal that car? A kid will look at you straight in the face and say, well, my girlfriend broke up with me and I needed to get over to see her. And they will tell you that like that. Why does that not make sense to you, lady? And it is it's not that simple, but that is an example of some of the cognitive skills that they're deficit in. So there's a number of frameworks that we have to work in. But the first thing we need to do is meaningful assessment and looking at where our limited funds need to be directed. And I think that's what we're working towards.
I have to just ask, at this point then, the individual probation officer in Fresno has how many cases?
A good caseload, if it's paid, well, behavioral health court, she's got the best caseload ever. On the adult side, she has 27 cases. The average caseloads runs about 170, and the bank caseloads are, as I said, enormous. If it's grant funded and we're able to keep the caseloads down to a minimum, those are really fortunate officers.
But the banked ones no one looks at. Is that?
The bank loads are like a fire drill. Every day at about 3 o'clock, the court sends a calendar and says, Joe Blow was arrested on this warrant, this and that and the other thing, and then they start running around looking at him, running a check to see if they have any new criminal activity, how long they've been out of contact, so we're ready to go into court and prepared with the conversation that we need to have with the judges. We do staff all of our adult courts. That has been very beneficial in terms of being able to talk treatment and to talk programs and to talk about, how we should impact some of these issues that we have. Some of the problems that we've had being underfunded is that warrants have just gotten out of containment. And so they're a huge impact. On the juvenile side, we just applied for a grant because we know we have a lot of FTAs over there. And the grant is as simple as what the dentist office does for you the night before, which is call you and say, you have an appointment at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And what they're saying we can do, if we get the money to do that, is reduce our FTAs by 75%. Now, that's remarkable to me because those people are churning in our local systems. So I'm sorry. So I think we need to make some we need to address sort of the low-hanging fruit and what we're going to do or not do with that, and we need to make some systemic changes to kind of roll out a more efficient, effective, nimble system.
So we issued a report, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago now, 8 years ago, on the parole system.
Mm-hmm.
The headline that came out of it, out of a very long report, was, which we did say, was $1 billion failure. It doesn't look to me, from what the work we've done, it's probably much better today than it was when we looked at it a number of years ago. We recommended a number of the realignment types of things that we're starting to consider now and talk about now. And we talked to a lot of probation people about the concept at the local level. And generally, especially when they would talk to us off the record, they told us that they could do, even though it's a tougher population, that they'd do a better job with that population than the parole people do. Do you believe that?
Let me lead with this. People in parole, good people, many, many hired right out of the ranks of probation. It is an enormous system. It goes without saying that enormity is very difficult to be flexible with. I run a department of 600 people. That's not, I mean, comparatively, it's like, you know, a tenth of a percentage of whatever's going on. It's much more effective to roll out policies and to roll out philosophies and talk about best practices and do those things with an organization that size. And I don't think that it is best to take an offender, move him over here, do what you're going to do, a low-level offender, I should say, because I think there are a fair amount of people that belong right where they are in the state prison system, and I really don't apologize for that for a second. But I am telling you that there's that low-level churner that I think would be best served locally. It will take a mammoth amount of work to roll out this realignment. But do I think at the end of the day that we'll have a more effective, nimble system? Yes.
Okay. Senator Rubio?
Since I've had to go up on some of the realignment, I feel it's important that philosophically, I believe, being both in the legislature and having some time at the local level, that complicated issues can best be solved at the local level. And so, given the enormity of the situation with the budget crisis and where we need to get, I think it's the best direction. And I agree with you 100% that when it is done this fiscal year and we kick off the next legislative year, there will be an ongoing slew of legislation to clean it up and further define particular issues of the realignment. You brought up something, though, that I'd like to highlight, and that is the lack of inpatient drug treatment facilities, not only in Fresno County, but the entire state. Are you familiar with any study or analysis or assessment that's been done statewide to examine the impact of the 7 juveniles or youth that are turned away because of the lack of capacity or lack of beds in inpatient facilities?
No, I apologize. I have no knowledge of a study that's looked at that. I mean, I can tell you anecdotally that the impacts are enormous, and that they tend to repeat and return in our system, and that we often see it becomes down to the haves and have-nots in life. If your mother and father have insurance and they can get you into a Kaiser program or to some other meaningful program that you can get in, but even with that, when there are meaningful programs, you have to be poised and ready and educated about that population, that they're going to fall, they're going to have dirty drug tests, you're going to see them again, and that it is not always best treated by putting them in for longer the next time. So you have to be ready to adjust. Our aftercare program, of those 40 beds, is almost one of the most important components of it, and that is how we triage that population when they move out. We have a number of people on both the juvenile and adult side that could utilize an inpatient drug treatment. It's a very expensive proposition. And
so is trying to deal with someone who goes on with a illness of having a substance abuse problem that's not being addressed. I would strongly suggest, I think a worthy endeavor by the commission is to find or determine which agency would be the best at the state, I don't know, to assess this problem on a statewide basis to determine the fiscal impact on our social system, because it's, I would venture to say, significant from a cost perspective.
yeah, I think it is. I think, but I'd also say, Senator Hoover, there's a number of people with addictions that don't find their way into the criminal justice system. It's a very interesting phenomenon to me. And maybe they don't get caught, or maybe they don't have to steal, or whatever it is. But I don't know why at some point we intersect with a number of them that find themselves. And District Attorney DeMona said it best. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Were they criminals who got addicted, or were they addicted people that decided to turn to criminal behavior? It's so complex, but worth a look. Let me say that.
Well, and we could start with assessing is whether or not there is a problem. I mean, the judge that was here before, and it was eloquently stated by the chairman, if you're able to break down the silos and get people to come together and discuss things in a holistic manner, and the end product is we need an inpatient facility, but we don't have one within our county, how many times does that occur in the 58 counties in the state? And I think that would be a wise study to move forward.
It would be. I mean, I'm almost certain I run the largest inpatient drug treatment in the state.
You do.
I don't think
There's only
anybody
8
else
current.
has. Right. I don't think anybody else has done that. It's like a little gold mine we hang on to, and not willing to give it up, because I think it makes a big difference. But to go back to the local issues, this year I have a $9.1 million target budget. I'm going to lose $9.1 million. Add on the $6.1 of VLF funding associated with that. That's $15.2 million. I'm going to have to close our commitment facility. Now, that's not good work. I'll still have some committed minors, but I'll have to take detention and parcel it out, a little bit of each. So the locals are facing enormous issues. And I'll say this about we were given a 13% general fund cut. That really actually amounted to $2.2 million cash. I had to then add on the cost of the retirement, then add on the cost of liability and workers' comp to that, took it up to $9.2 million. So it's a very complicated effort that we're all working in. The concern I have, and the reason I think so many of us have recognized that realignment may be a necessity, is that there are no budget solutions out there that are meaningful right now. And without this, the next step is catastrophic, in my opinion. Systems across the board will break. And it's not to say we're all doing perfect, because we're not. We have made our own mistakes in probation. We've continued to do business trying to use our gut and our own, and I think those are all important things on a specific officer. But the truth of the matter is that when your systems are this big, you better start using something that has some proven outcomes and getting the bang for your buck on something that you can put your finger on and say it works. I really liked your question before. Have you ever stopped doing a program that you figured out wasn't working? Well, the justice system did that for a long time, all of us. We all did.
I mean, we see it. I mean, you mentioned drug and alcohol treatment. I mean, we've looked at that a number of times. And once you're in the system for drug and alcohol treatment, it's really, I mean, you're in it. And nobody really looks at how good you are. You could be really good and get funded, or you could be really lousy and get funded.
Well,
and we just can't do that anymore.
Right.
And we've been saying that.
Judges will tell you one of their frustration is that the treatment programs that are out there aren't meaningful. We assess, for instance, probation's charged with assessing domestic violence programs, and we assess them and we say, your program's not getting it. You don't have the outcomes we want. We're not going to use you anymore.
Boom.
Immediately, then they say, well, Chief, I'm suing you. I don't like really the way you did that. I mean, that is how it rolls. when on the felony sentencing side of the world, we look at programs that the judges are using. And oftentimes a defense attorney will come in, and that's their job, it's what they do, and say, I got this fabulous program over here and I want you to use it. And we kind of know, well, that's not really a program, that's a sober living environment. And by the way, the living environment's not even that good. And so we try to do a fair amount of assessment for the courts of the programs that we have. The good news on drug treatment programs in drug courts is that all the expertise is framed around that, and so they're using meaningful programs with meaningful teams triaging the individual, and rather than treating them as a anomaly they know nothing about. There's a lot of information, but treatment programs are difficult to keep up and running. There's a number of systems in the health world, in behavioral health world, that make it difficult to open a treatment program. So we all interface. We're all in this together, and even the realignment recognizes that by saying that, you get this block grant of money, you better put together a team of people that talk about how you're going to roll this out effectively.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for coming up. Did you drive up?
I did. It's beautiful.
Oh.
I had better hair when I started. I just want to go with that right now, doggone it.
I have no cards from the public, so I'll assume that we have none, and so I will adjourn the public hearing. We'll reconvene. Oops. I will reopen the public hearing.
Thanks. Good to see you.
I usually ask if you could limit to 5 minutes. That'd be appreciated.
I'm just going to do it real quick. Melinda Silva, I'm a parole agent in Sacramento and also president of the Parole Agents Association. I've heard all the arguments. I also was a probation officer for 10 years, worked juvenile and adult probation. I guess the point I sort of want to make, we are in a dilemma. Our bosses work for the governor, so would need to support the realignment, and kind of puts us, but we are local. I've done county probation. I've done state. Certainly we are local. I think it is a resource issue where if you give us enough money, we can do a good job. We have watched our services be eroded. I have second strikers and mentally ill. We started losing resources years ago. And when we talk about accountability, I guess my expectation or hope would have been, and I've seen it in budget hearings, where the legislature holds the Department of Corrections accountable for the money they get. So we don't increase it and add more supervisors, but we keep services available to the very people I'm trying to help succeed. So I think when it goes to the counties, and I've heard the probation officers also say, if the counties get $50 million and the sheriffs tend to prevail on the money they get, it still doesn't stay filtering down to the people that need it, the parolees, the probationers, whatever they are. So I have some concern that we are just shifting funds, and I'm not sure we're still addressing the real problem of what we have. It is just a huge money issue. I think personally, watching everyone uses 67% recidivism, the department has done a horrible job of monitoring it. Those of us that have caseloads will tell you we're not at 67%, but that number has stuck, and we haven't seen it. We have people that'll give 12 dirty drug tests. We still don't put some of them back in if they're not violent or sex offenders. And I think one of the things that we do lose statewide, a number of sex offenders will go back to the county and you will have them supervised in 58 different ways. The consistency that the state does bring, some of the inherent problems of the state, are also the best way, I think, to supervise some of these high-end offenders. So, I just think it has always been funding. We had many more programs. We don't have them now. Personally, I'm someone who, and I know there's a lot of parole agents out there that look to the county and find our own resources within the local areas that we work. So,
yeah, what was your name?
This is Todd Gillum.
I'm Todd Gillum. I'm the Vice President of the Parole Agents Association. A couple things I'd like to point out. First of all, the numbers of the current population. There's about 273,000 people that are under the jurisdiction of both CDCR and DAPO, the Division of Adult Parole. About 150,000 of those people are going to be put onto the counties. About 100,000 for custody. About 50,000 are in that subcategory that will go to state prison but be returned to the county for supervision. For the symmetry of the rule, if they're serious enough to go to state prison for incarceration, they probably should stay with us for post-sentence supervision. It seems kind of silly to say you're such a serious offender that you're going to go to state prison for your incarceration, but you don't warrant parole supervision afterwards. So that's one issue that seems to be in conflict with the idea of splitting the jurisdiction. Additionally, I understand we're working with reentry courts in San Diego. We're not in opposition to any of the remedial sanction, alternative sanctions. We support all of that. Right now, the only thing that we can threaten these guys with in order to comply with what is expected of them is return to custody, and that is being taken away. So even if that authority is returned to the county judge, it should be maintained. And by taking that away from us, we're going to have nothing to motivate these individuals to comply with what is expected of them. So I'm not opposed to allowing the judges to do it as opposed to the commissioners that do it now, but that should be retained.
And if I could just add, we are doing the flash incarceration. In my unit in SAC Metro 4, I understand it's sort of patchwork parole with these pilot programs, but we are doing it.
Where do you put them?
They go to the local jail for anywhere from 2 days to the 14 days that they're currently having. So that and the new parole model, we're sort of on the starting point of the evidence-based practices and trying to roll it out, and certainly haven't had the opportunity to do it on the magnitude that is being proposed.
When you get somebody, do you get the full compass risk assessments along with it now?
For the ones that are done, it's still sort of a delay in getting it. But yes, we do get the compass assessments.
We met with your bosses about 3 years ago, and they told us that they would roll out this program, and we had parole agents in the room, and they told us they'd never heard of it.
Well, and that would be a whole discussion on a whole different day. We just went to one of the parole models, and I will tell you that it's not used as well, and that's part of the inherent problem of accountability in making these things be used appropriately. We just met with Mimi Carter and Mark Carey, who have this parole model evidence-based process out there, and it was being taught. In fact, we just went to Bakersfield, the last parole reform model that we went to, and they were teaching us all of the compass assessments. So the prior references to it's not just about drugs. Drugs is an absolute huge part of it, but it's the cognitive stuff. It's helping them with all the other skills that they need to be able to be successful. So we're starting. And hopefully we'll be able to keep doing some of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your attending and for coming to talk to us. Okay, so with that, we'll adjourn the public hearing. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes across the street at 925 L Street in the downstairs conference room, Ledge Analyst conference room for our business meeting.
Great. very much. Thank you.
Oh, blue raincoat would be good for me today. I might have to put that off. It's not right, though. Thank you, guys. You're busy people. Oh,
Okay.
it's
Good. Good. You've got a lot of what's going on. I don't know how 618 is going to work with the reentry and pretty
all right. Everybody's got a raincoat. That's not right. So I was walking over and looked at the inclement.
Yeah.
I was going to take a cheap shot at you, but I didn't. I was going to ask you about your pension.
Yeah, but it does need eye contact. It
always realize somebody loves getting out.
Go, Dan.
Really enhance the because they were taxing, they were taxing when money they should, and they, board of supervisors should tap the money. And the union sued. And then as a result of the settlement, I know, they enhanced. Yeah, just take that class.
How do I work that through?
Thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
Right, and they bring all kinds of different.
Exactly.
I'm glad you did the Judy stuff.
Oh my gosh, the sky is we're right there.
I mean, you realize that they really do only say.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I keep thinking, holy, but like I said, we don't do
Hey, Gail,
it.
Stu Drown, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. So I'm willing to get in
Oh,
and
great.
work. And besides that,
She's up here a bit. We were on the, she was part of the CJCCCPOA
Go get the county administrator.
Embassy Suites group.
Okay.
I don't know what else to call us.
Okay, yeah. Good, well, this was
We had Jeff Smith from
interesting.
Santa Clara County, and we had
I mean,
health HHS people from Santa Clara, all testified, said, we can do it, we'll do a better job than you do, and we'll do it more efficiently.
I think that's what they're trying to say at the state level, but they can't say that. I listened to a podcast yesterday on that page. They were all over, and understandably, I mean, they got a lot of inefficiencies. But, you know, when they said, how many prisoners are guarding those beds in the hospital? I mean, how many guards are guarding the beds? Well, you know, I know they have too many. I know what the game is, but the other side of that is that, you know, the MOUs themselves are so prohibitive.
mental health thing up here, and he is the guy who told me, we got the biggest
Crazy.
program.
And then we gotta get out of the federal receiver. I think she'd like hire Kaiser or something.
Good.
We've had,
And, you know, and then I know from my private life that if you have
and the guy running the place was,
that,
used to run the IT
you know, middle
department.
class kids who don't have problems, it's
Running some
really
health
difficult
services
to figure out a way to treat them.
And we were actually going to do a study on
Their parents and just
what it would take to get out of receivership.
What do you do with this?
Recommendations of
When we did that
different
first
people
alcohol and drug study, that was like one of the things that we found that there was, of all the, I mean, there was a,
said, okay, we'll stay.
so much, not enough drug treatment in general, but drug treatment was the most critical area where there was no, because you could do, like with adults, you could do drug, Medi-Cal, and there was different, you had the baby program, and, you know, there were these programs for all of them.
We haven't met before, and this guy here, one of my heroes now, you know, Hoover, and we all knew who she was. She was the judge manual.
And I did juvenile court for 5 years. I was never presiding, but as a judge. So,
you win every day.
Is that what you said, you win every day? I like that.
Whoever.
What we did say though is that there needs to be, we have some integrated in here, so there ought to be regional facilities.
well, that being
I
sued
mean, the
by the
facilities live out
CVS
there,
are suing
so we
them
should
basically, and they're saying,
I
they're expensive.
I haven't heard of any other alternative.
It's
like Juniper and Bang.
Bang, right.
That's all unbelievable.
You know,
The
yes,
ones
because
the
having been a
governor
judge,
wants to
you
just
know, we
bypass
tried
the legislature
everything,
bill
and I was
and
the
put it
kind
on
of
the
judge
November
where
ballot,
you
and
could
she's
spend
spent a lot of money.
and of course, that's not, you know, that's not
Right.
system like
Well,
that.
either, but
But
you
you
set
set
up
up
the
the,
cashier
you know,
to
to
just-
programs that had all these things.
Isn't it nice to have somebody
And
that
that's
really is
when
really
they handedly savvy. And he's got big fat deep pockets,
Yeah.
and he can then commit whatever he wants.
And
That
so
you
he
just,
said, you know,
you
you don't want to
can't
plan on
just
just
do
doing
it
initiatives.
initially.
What,
I mean,
hundreds
they've
of
got
hundreds of thousands of signatures.
And they've got,
You know.
You know, they have the highest
But-
security facilities for those
Right,
kids.
but
Well, what-
the kids that don't have supervision.
right.
Yeah, it's
crazy. Right.
You know,
I think you can define, yes, they've got to define the population. Yes.
Nice to meet you, Stu.
Nice to meet you, Dan.
Okay.
Yeah,
Run
the
across
time
the
is
street.
now.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, I think it's happening right now.
They're talking about it.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, yes. Are we gonna use that umbrella or can I pack it?
For me? Right. I was kind of.
I wonder what it's like outside. I don't know, I heard it the other part before.
Yeah, I heard, I saw somebody when I left in the middle to go, try to send something on my iPad. I ran into a friend and she just had walked 5 blocks and she was soaked down to her socks. But that was about an hour ago. Yeah, oh, and that's like, that's how it's been here. It's like 1 minute it's pouring, the next it's not.
You haven't accrued one penny of savings.
Where's my dog?
Because you haven't been responsible. I'm talking out of school now. I should feel
Oh,
out.
this is me.
Thanks for coming up.
Just trash.
I'm gonna have to take
Yeah, that's gonna get everything else thinking.
You're gonna, okay.
Well, so nice to get you down to San Diego.
I'm getting you up to San Joaquin.
Yeah.
Actually,
There you go.
actually, know what you are gonna get? You're gonna
Thank
get
you,
my daughter.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, she just got accepted to USD. That's her number 1 choice. That's
For
her
law school or undergraduate?
for undergrad. But she does want to be a lawyer, so that's the track she wants